Hello, everybody. Welcome back for another week of Growing with my fellow growers. I'm your host, Jack Greenstock, joined as always by an amazing panel. I'm going to kick it over first to Spartan Grown. Welcome back.
Thank you, Jack. It's good to be back. I'm Spartan Grown. You can find me on Instagram, all one word, Spartan Grown, no spaces, or you could shoot me an email over at spartangrown@gmail.com or russ@gmlarmy.com, and I can help you with all of your growing or lighting questions.
Happy to have you back as always. And for the first hour, Brandon Rust will be joining us. Welcome, Brandon.
Howdy. Yeah, good to be back. We see got a bunch of different stuff going on. Go check out the website. Definitely, we do weekly blog posts on all things soil and soil chemistry and microbiology on the Bokashi Earthworks website, and we got seeds on the Bokashi Seed Vault website.
Good stuff. I even saw some cuts going out through there as well for a little bit. I'm sure those are all probably sold out already. If not, the cool stuff for sure to just to see and to know. Have them keep their eyes out for some good genetics over there. And last and certainly not least of our current panelists, we have the American one.
Hello, Jack panel and everyone in chat. I am the American One on YouTube and the American One underscore with underscore Keens over on the IG. And yeah, it's good to be here and see everyone.
Good to have you back. And without further ado, tonight's topic is going to be about the vegetative cycle. We recently talked a little bit about popping seeds, taking clones, etc. But I want to focus tonight on how we get the most out of our veg cycle, how we grow them the fastest, get them big, healthy, and ready to go into flower. I think often it's overlooked, the veg cycle. Everybody likes to focus on the flower because that is where the beautiful, frosty, good smelling buds come from. And it's easy to focus on that nearly exclusively. But I think if you start off with a good veg, in terms of getting your IPM dialed in, getting your nutrients and things dialed in before you flip, then you're setting yourself up for success. And I want to let the listeners out there know how we do that the best way as possible, talking about things like pot sizes, nutrients or soil mixes that we might use, and temperature ranges, all that different things that we might consider, even different lighting types, spectrums, etc. So without further ado, I guess I'll pass it, and we'll start with the focus on pot sizes. And I'll pass it to Spartan and ask, how do you go about, is it all, do you start in the final pot? Do you start in a small pot? What's your process for potting up or not transferring?
Oh, okay, thanks, Jack. Yeah, I like to pot up. I don't like to start my final pots. My final pots are always I grow in sub containers, so they're somewhere between a 10 and a 15 gallon of soil. And so yeah, I definitely don't start in that. That would be difficult to water. So I start out in a smaller container, usually about a solo cup size, which is I would say half gallon. And once they outgrow that container, they get potted into a 1 gallon, and then from the 1 gallon, then they'll go to that final step into the final container after a 1 gallon. So there's a couple, usually two repots at least for every plant that goes through my system at home. And I do that just to build a good root base. Um, I have I have actually done where I would go from a clone into, maybe a half gallon or even a clone plug into the final pot. And a lot of times what happens, because I like to investigate the root balls afterwards a little bit. And a lot of times what happens is the roots will shoot straight to the edges of the pot, go down, and then you have all this empty space in the middle that you're not really utilizing with root growth. And that's kind of why I myself have reinforced in my own head why I want to do that repotting. It forces the root ball to be smaller so that when I repot it into the next pot, that middle is actually filled out with roots rather than being just empty space that's not utilized. And that's kind of why I do that thing. And of course, I've done it both ways, and I've got better results when it's done that way, when there's, a better root ball. So I guess that's why I do those things, and those are the pot sizes I use.
I would concur with that for sure. And I have seen people have success with like autoflowers starting in the final pot, but typically for a photo period plant, I would suggest that people start in a smaller size and pot up if they can. For certain reasons that might not be a possibility, whether travel or physical ailments and things like that. So I understand why some people might start in a larger pot or their final pot and things like that. I even saw a guy start autos in they weren't earth boxes, they were earth box juniors. So they're like a little bit smaller sip containers, and they actually crushed. That was like their best grow that they had ever had up to that point. So they're like really sold on the sips after that point, and it's a cool product and works really well. But I'm curious, the American one, what is your process from going, whether you started a seed or a clone, you've got it going early. What's the first size pot, and then how do you transition throughout the veg cycle in terms of uh, sizes of the pot?
I pretty much concur with Spartan. I don't like going into the big containers straight away. I've tried that, and it seems like it would be easier and the plant would do better. But I usually, well, I guess it all depends. I've started clones in cubes and the pea things and solo cups, and even like the dollar store, they have these they're like half the size of a solo cup, but a little probably the wide as wide as the top of it, but like shallower. But whatever, it depends on what size cut you're taking as well. But in any case, I start either in one of those three, and I think I try sticking with solo cups because it keeps the clone wet enough and it's easy enough. You get pro mix and have it all the time, and you don't have to soak it in a pH adjusted thing like Rockwell. Oh, and yes, I think Spartan's about to chime in on that Velocigrow new product that he tried, which I watched part of that episode and I'm very intrigued. And you just let them sit in the water, huh, Spartan? And boom, they take
Yeah,
root.
I'm loving that,
Dude,
dude.
all
I'm
right.
loving
Yeah,
that.
I'm gonna have to get me some of those and try that without a doubt.
But I was gonna chime in too, is like you said you like to use a solo cup. Another advantage of the solo, a lot of people poo-poo and give me shit about still using solo cups, but I love the solo cup, the clear cup in a solid cup thing, so you can actually physically look at the root growth and watch it. You can physically watch the root growth, and there's no doubt about where your roots are going. So without really disturbing the plant.
I really like that because and people don't want to get like upset about plastic. Like I found compostable clear plastic cups and compostable red plastic cups. So it doesn't even have to be like bad for the environment or whatever. But I have used that in determining I had two really good plants in veg, and when I was selecting for breeding, I was like, well, this one's got a better root ball clearly than the other one, and it also gives you more than just like the very bottom of the cuts on the solo cup. When you start seeing those roots poke out, you're knowing, okay, now it's about time to transplant. Before that, you'll start seeing the roots growing out and down to the side of the pot. So it kind of gives you a better idea of how much root mass there is, where it's at. And so I'm a huge fan of the solo cups. But I'm curious, Brandon, what size pots do you like to start off with in veg? And do you do a transplant during the veg cycle before you get into flower?
It's just contingent on what my goal is for the end result. So um, sometimes I'll do clones directly into a bed where I'll do more like a seed green style, where I'll do, let's say, like 25 clones in maybe in my 3x3 bed. And I'm talking about my home grow here. um, and I may just veg for like 3 days just to get them established and then flip. But I also like if I was not going to do that style where I'm doing a seed green and have 25, clones in a 3x3 area, if I'm doing something like 12 or 16, I'm doing half that amount. Usually what I'll do is I'll top them and I'll veg a little bit longer. And I might start them in like a solo cup just to get them a little bit more established so I can top them when they're real early. And then sometimes I'll do 1 gallon pots. And if I'm doing 1 gallon pots at home, it's usually just like stuff that I'm hunting through. And I'll just do a whole run where I'll veg it in a 1 gallon pot and flip it in a 1 gallon pot. And usually the way that I do that is I just take a clone of whatever it is that I'm hunting through and I put them in the pots, let them get established, and then I just run them.
In terms of moving on from the pot size, this is going to be probably pretty similar across the board, I would guess, but I'll pass it back to Brandon first. What type of environmental conditions do you like to keep, whether temperature, humidity, or even VPD, if you want to throw numbers out there for that kind of ranges?
Yeah, so VPD in veg usually zero point 0.9 to 1, which is usually 82 to 84 degrees and usually like 70, I think 374 RH. 75 RH. So nice and humid, nice and hot. And when I transition, I keep kind of those same parameters. And then what I'll do is I'll increase my lighting, which will, that increases the heat. So you have to make sure that your air handlers or whatever it is that you're doing um, can handle that. I ramp my light, and then what I'll do is I'll start decreasing the RH and the humidity, periodically, like week by week throughout the grow. And then towards the end, I'll turn the light back lower, and I'll decrease the light intensity at the end. And, my end goal is to kind of get around like 45% humidity in around like maybe like 72, 73 degrees. But even colder than that is okay. And some varieties will like purple up and show like better expressions in color if you do that. But I err on the side of caution when it comes to humidity and flower, especially later on. But for veg, nice and hot and nice and humid, they really like that. And one of the things that's really cool is if you have a space that's a veg room and you keep clones in there, if you can keep your parameters on point, you shouldn't really need to have to use like domes, and that'll help with airflow and it'll help with potential uh, contamination.
I
Given
love not having to use the domes, especially like when I prefer the little deep water culture kind of clone system where they have the collars, and some of the systems actually come with a dome, but I run it in my veg space and I try
Oh
and
yeah,
keep my veg space humid enough that the clones, they just root within, 10 days or less,
yep.
pretty much every single time I've run that. So
Arrow cloners.
yeah, I have like an
Yep.
oxyclone, which is a little bit cheaper version. It's basically just water bubbling in the bottom. And
Yep.
I've even simplified the system. It has like a pump and stuff that's normally in there. I just run an air stone with basically a tube in there. So it just blows air into one of the collars. And that way you don't have to clean the pump each run because those things get dirty really fast. Same with the air stones. Those get dirty and they're hard to clean. So I just have a permaclone collars makes that tubing that you can sterilize, basically like microwaving it or a few other ways and reuse them. And high percent, like 90 plus 95, 99% success rate with that. So I really love using those. And environment does matter though. So that's a
Speaking
big
of
factor.
utilization, when it comes to taking clones, that is really, really big. It's super huge. It can greatly increase your rooting rate. And one of the things that I've seen, because I've seen a lot, but I was at a facility when I was out in Ohio, and they had done a bunch of testing on all of the different media. They did rock wool, root plugs. They did, all the different brands and stuff. And they sent them to a microbial lab, and they all had a lot of anaerobic bacteria, things like Fusarium, like stuff that's not good. Like you don't want to expose to cannabis. And so, highly recommend sterilizing all your media before use.
That's a huge part of success in the veg space slash cloning space. I think
Yeah.
keeping your area clean, keeping your equipment clean, uh, keeping your plants clean, it's all one big happy system, and it'll prevent issues down the road. You might think, oh, this thing sprang up in flower. Well, it's been on your thing since probably when you took a cut or in the veg when things got out of whack. So really important to consider that stuff for sure.
It could be worse yet. I've heard plenty of examples like what Brandon's alluding to here at commercial levels where people like an entire bag of media. We'll just say media. I don't even have to call out the people as much as I'd like to. Um, that, you think because you've used the product again and again in a
Yeah.
commercial setting over and over again, no problems. We get one bad batch that wasn't, stored right or whatever the issue is, and it's full, it has a big fungal load on it, and your cuts don't take it all. And now you thought you've had everything because every time before, you just took all your cuts, then you killed the mom and you went with it. Well, now all those cuts didn't take, and now your genetics are gone. So always have backups. Don't always assume it's always going to work. Always, I would always, caution you, don't kill that mother plant until you know, leave a little bit on it and just leave it in that pot until you for sure have a rooted cut, because there's so many examples of especially the peat-based stuff um, having fungal loads. That's like the Velasa or Viper roots or whatever the heck they call hyper roots that we were looking at.
Yeah, Velocigrow
The
Hyperroot.
Velocigrow. We just interviewed them on Let's Be Buds, and he's talking about how they actually do that testing with it to make sure that they don't have too much fungal load. And if they do, they get rid of those, and you won't see those. So that's another thing a lot of people don't think about, and they just take for granted is the media itself.
Easy to overlook. And I've seen people like get as extreme as like microwaving or baking their media and stuff like that. I haven't gone to that extreme, but I have suggested and recommended and implemented either throwing stuff out or moving it outdoors and using it in outdoor gardens, because after a certain point, it's not going to be worth the fight of going through the process of making it usable again in your indoor garden when you can just pick up a fresh bag fairly affordably and amend that and get it going. But Tao, in terms of environment in your veg space, what kind of parameters do you like to run if you can? Because I know depending on where you're at, I know sometimes the conditions can get a little bit extreme, and
Yeah,
it might not be easy to regulate and get it. But like ideally, where are you
it
shooting for, and what do you accept?
well, like at one point, I remember being in the basement at the other place, and it was perfect because I had a ton of plants. I didn't want them to grow crazy, so it was relatively cool, and they were all happy. It was like a state of suspension almost, and they were happy though for a long time without growing very much. So that was cool, but definitely temperature. If you're trying to get roots, if you're trying to take clones, you have to make sure that it's warm because clones will not do well below 60. I mean, you want at least 70, definitely, probably more. But I don't know for sure. But if it's too cold, your plants will not grow. If the roots are cold, your plants will not grow. So yeah, you need warmth, definitely. And yeah, like pretty much what Brandon was saying. I don't necessarily want it to be 80 degrees or higher, but if you're over 70, 75, so definitely 75. If you want your plants growing really good, yeah, you want it warmer. So it depends on the situation. If you want to really push them, yeah, you want at least 80 and have the relative humidity in the 70s or more, yeah. And then definitely cut back on the humidity during flower and all that too, no doubt. But I also want to say, like Spartan was saying about upplanting, definitely go to a cup, then a 1 gallon, let those roots fill up that 1 gallon, then move into a bigger container because that'll definitely help. And it's easier on the watering. You won't overwater as easily. And yeah, I find it just way better. The plants grow quicker when you keep them in small containers and plant them at the proper time.
That is a great point. I personally think under LED they can get away with being in that high 70s, low 80s range and actually tend to like it. I've worked with some growers who were running mid to low 70s, and then when they pushed it up to the high 70s, the plants seemed to get a lot happier, even with the same nutrient cycle or soil mixes and things like that. I'm curious, Spartan, what kind of environmental conditions do you like to give during your veg to hit those kind of ideal growth conditions?
Yeah, my veg is I let it just roll, man. I want it to go. I want it warm and as much humidity that I can get in there without me having to add humidity because that costs me money too. So, yeah. So I like to be just where Brandon was saying. Pretty much would be absolute perfect if I could just pick something high 70s, low 80s with like you're like low 70s percentage, maybe even up to 80%. If I could get it there, that would be fucking amazing. It never gets that high for me humidity wise. But if it was in veg, I would be totally fine with that. I'd even run a little bit warmer up to 84, 85. But that's only if you want to have a veg that's cooking fast. Like Tom brought up a great point. Depending on your timing of things, you might not want your veg running that fast. You might not need that kind of growth if you're feeding only one flower room with your veg. You know what I mean? You don't need sometimes 2 months of growth. You can get away with just 1 month of growth. Depending on where you are and where your plants need to be, it might be better to run at cooler temperatures to get that slower growth so that your timing is right. So you don't have an over vegged plant when you go to go into flower. One thing I was thinking of when we were talking that I do, and I can't think of a scientific reason that I do it now that that I do it, but one thing that I've always done and was told, and it kind of goes along with the whole idea of so above the soil below kind of a deal. And that's when I transplant. I like to either at the same time at transplant or shortly thereafter do my topping because I figure that I was always told coming up that when you top your plant, the roots also tend to shoot out and to stimulate some more growth. So what time do I want to stimulate root growth? Right after I transplant, man, or right when I'm transplanting, because I'm putting it into new media, giving them a chance to grow out. And in fact, I might even do the same kind of thing as root topping, right? Like if you just score the plant, like when you pull out uh any other plant, like I mean, in the nursery field, this is like a common thing. When you pull out a root bound plant or one that's well rooted, you pull it out and you just score one side or two sides to cut through some of those roots so that they'll regrow and it won't get root bound. I like to kind of do the same thing. If I have a plant that I maybe went a little bit longer than I would like, and I have a lot of root mass on a transplant, I'll cut those suckers too. I'll score them just to stimulate that root growth. You guys tried that? I do that all the time, but I can't. I don't think I can show you a white paper that says that works. I can't show you. It's just
Yeah,
stuff that I've always done, and I can't really.
I was watching an episode of fucking Talking Shit with Eagle, and this dude, shit, his thing just escaped me.
Hardy.
No, the Wonders of the World. Fuck, I forget, but I'll remember. I'll get back. But the dude took out his fucking goatus transplant. He picked up the fucking root ball, shook the fuck out of it, peeled off everything. It looked like a schwazing, dude. The only thing that was left was like the fucking stick of root and like a little bit, tiny little bit. And he stuck him in the thing, and he came on like 3 days
World's last
later, and they
hope.
were kicking ass. The plants were back to health amazingly, dude.
Was it
And
World's
like,
Last Hope? I think.
yeah, the world's last hope. That's it. That's him. And I was like, holy shit, I'm gonna go try and find that footage, man, because that was just astonishing. And I wouldn't advise that, but you
I
could
don't go that
definitely,
extreme, but
I
I'm a
think,
Spartan.
like Spartan was saying, when you top the up, what happened below, up is above as below. When you top the plant above, it branches out. When you cut the roots down below, they branch out and make more roots. So it definitely is a thing. And there's the other guy, Dr. Derek Butt, fuck, Dr. Derek Butt, right? You guys, he passed away. He had a YouTube channel. He was an older dude who he fucking was preaching the root pruning too heavily. And he did it with no harm, no foul either. So I
I've
believe
seen it
there's something
done
to it. If
at
you're
every
gentle,
nursery.
yeah,
If you go pick up a six pack of plants that are a nursery, it doesn't matter what they are. They're going to be in these tiny little cells, and by the time you take them out, they're going to be really root bound. And I like to kind of tickle the outside where you use your fingers to kind of lightly break
they're
them up.
really little though. I'm talking about like a gallon size.
No,
It's really little.
and the
Yeah,
same concept sort of applies.
right,
And
right.
every nursery, one of the things that astounded me was the reason that they keep them in the pots, the sizes that they are, is to keep the plants small because they want to have more
Yeah,
small
yeah.
plants. The more plants they can fit in there, the more plants they can sell. And it makes like, yeah, they can eventually grow larger and then they can sell those plants for more money. But ideally, they want to have a bunch of small plants to sell. And even the plants that are larger would be bigger than they are if they were transplanted into a larger pot. Getting them root bound is part of their profitability in their process. Like it's keeping more plants. One of my I don't even want to say the relation, but the guy who worked in the nursery industry in Ohio a long time ago said that they experimented with these like copper pots trying to like slow the growth of the plant even more, where they would have like copper lined pots where they would like kind of be like a little like metal mesh of copper in there to basically like choke out the root ball
They have, yeah,
and trying to
yeah.
keep the plant small.
They have
So
horticultural copper paint that they were painting the insides of containers with. I saw in this one episode, but not cannabis. Yeah, something.
and it's just really interesting because like when we're trying to think about like maximizing growth, they're doing the opposite because their business is more of a, they're selling a bunch of small veg plants or whatever. They're not necessarily caring about it being perfectly healthy because when it gets to your garden, they don't give a shit anymore. Ideally they should. Ideally they should want you to have success. And like ideally, they should, if it's like a fruit tree or something, they should want you to get your fruit as soon as possible instead of like saying like, oh, it's gonna sit for a year and then like rest for a year and then it'll fruit or whatever. It's like they'll like give you all these like, excuses and like expectations, which become the norm because of how they treated it before. But like if you start something from seed, you can get something in certain plants to fruit within the same year sometimes, it's like cannabis is one of them, right? Fruits and flowers or whatever within the same year, where a lot of other plants can do that, but under non-ideal nursery conditions, it doesn't happen. So it's one of the reasons I do like focusing on what we can do to maximize our veg because as home growers, we can actually get the plants growing pretty fast. And something Spartan mentioned was it's like maybe you want it to grow in a colder environment, which sounds like a little oxymoronic. It's like, why would you make your environment worse? I've seen so many plants where people grow these like 6, 7, 8 foot tall plants, and there's only 1 foot of bud at the top. And then they have these long naked legs. They've stripped off the entire. And one of my OG mentors was like, all that bottom stuff, it's like you just paid for that. That's all electrical. That's all nutrients. That's all time. You just paid for all that bottom trunk. That's basically hemp stalk, right? It's worthless to you. At the end, it's a cool skeleton. It might look cool to have this big giant plant, but really, when you've only got 1 or 2 feet of bud, you can cut your veg down way shorter and still get a similar yield. So I think a lot of people are over vegging still. And it's easy to because the plant stretches so much after we flip the flower when we do have a healthy plant. So
Oh, there's also things coming out, like that under canopy that when people have that kind of an issue that you just identified that you can address those situations with that too. You can just throw light there. Then you don't have to then you don't have to remove it because the whole point or the whole idea for doing stuff like that is because the light's not getting there and it's not going to produce what you want. Well, then put light there.
and I'm in agreement, and I've always kind of thought from a logical perspective that would work. Um, I do think like when you're at like a mitten canico or even trichome forage style size, there's considerations of like what your plant count and table sizes, and it's a lot different than like a home grow at that point. But I even think at the home grow scale, like I've showed these little grow boxes where they have just basically little LED panels that you like stick on the side. You could put it in a shoebox basically and start growing. And they're using side lighting and top lighting and diagonal corner, like every single potential spot that they can put lights in there, they are. And that's how they have to maximize the yield because they don't want to overheat things and have too much intensity coming from any one spot. And you can make it work, man. It's really incredible what is possible when we're growing the plant in tiny, tiny little spaces and trying to get the most out of it. We got a question, I think, here earlier from Hills Grows. Spartan, if you not bound by plant count, what are your thoughts on Sea of Green from Clone? 0 veg days beside the 21 to 28 days in the cloner. But that's a
Yeah,
long
I thought
time in the
this would be
clone.
a fun question for everyone, but in my opinion, I think I have a caveat, probably like there is with everything, but like as long as you're not growing from seed, and this is a clone that you've grown the plant to full maturity and it gets full sex. I'm not a big fan of, there's a lot of people that will pheno hunt. They'll just pop a bunch of seeds like this rather than doing the clones, but pop a bunch of seeds, flip them really fast. And I don't know. I feel like that if you don't get a full veg, my opinion is if they don't reach like that pre-flower stage in veg first, you're kind of rushing things and you don't get the full expression of the plant of what it's going to come out until you grow it the second time. At least in my humble experience in my own growing, it's like I've rushed veggies like that before, and then when I grew it the second time, it was like kind of different. Not, I mean, it was very similar, but to me, there's still differences that kind of changed on the second grow because I rushed through it the first time. So now I really think I give them a chance. It's like I want to make sure that I see some pre-flowers and let that plant kind of mature before I flip it so I can get that full expression and make that determination whether I want it's a keeper or not. But if that's out the window, you've already grown all these, and this is a clone that is tried and true. Yeah, I'm down with you. Yeah, if I have no plant count, I want to see a green. It makes way more sense. It's easier all the way around. Smaller containers. You can usually put them in a big tray and just flood it or whatever if you want to make it easy for watering. When it goes to trimming at the end, you're just trimming colas. You're maxing out the whole space. They're all growing so they grow very uniform because they don't, they're not even alive that long to grow that different. So they're all very similar. There's a lot of advantages of doing Sea of Green, and I'm down for it. The only time I'm really not is that if you're growing from seed, I'm not a fan.
I think even when growing from seed, there's a small option or potential that you can make it work. Like when I was growing in cocoa, I'm such a pheno hunter and we do have plant count. And I know I'll get back to this question because it is talking about plant count, but I popped just as many seeds as I could in my little space. And then I did kind of a It was because the first run I did in my tent, I did 2 plants in cocoa and I had them in 3 gallon pots. And they ended up I vegged until I saw sex, like Spartan and many other OGs recommend. Okay. So following along with a lot of the good advice that I do think, depending on your space, can work. So I got them. I started in solo cups, went to 1 gallon pots, then 3 gallon pots. Start showing sex. They're like 60 days into the veg, and I fucked up. I grew Blue Dream, right? And these Blue Dream went buck wild and just like grew through like I put up like 4 or 5 different layers of trellis netting, and they just kept growing through it. And they got 4 times the height that they were when I flipped it like about a foot, and they got to about 4 or 5 feet, and it was just an absolute shit show. So that was a example of not necessarily knowing the genetic, like Spartan mentioned. If you're going to do that, you should know the genetic beforehand. And if I was going to run a sea of green, I would definitely want to know the genetics beforehand. You can, in fact, if you want to go like Frank Gigak style, a guy who did like the underground bunker grows, you can basically just as soon as they root, flip them and have as many plants as you need to fill the room, and you'll get a couple, foot tall plants with some colas on them. And I kind of did that with one of my cocoa grows. It was Sour 76 and Platinum Yeti. And let me go see here. I think I've got it. I can share screen here. But like Spartan was saying, at the end when you go to trim, it's basically just all nug and cola because they're the plants are just a couple. It's like 3 or 4 colas per plant, and I had like 5 plants packed into a tiny little space. So I'm gonna go share. Here we go. Share. Boom. Alrighty. You might be able to see this. This is one of the Sour 76 plants, but I'm just gonna flip through. And you'll see like look at these plants. They're just like little baseball bats of buds. And this was like right before this was a harvest day. And so I wet trimmed in this case, but you can see here before and after. But just had a bunch of plants packed into a tiny little tent. And I think I got a video. I'll go back here a second to give an example of the Platinum Yeti were much taller and a little bit more airy than the Sour 76. But here there was 5 plants in 5 square feet. So each plant only had 1 square foot, and they're all in 1 gallon cocoa pots. This
Nice.
was
Do you water them
less
once a day or more?
It was about once a day. Yep.
Okay.
Sometimes they needed more. It was hot certain days. But yeah, they were only vegged for I want to say it was 30 days and then 66 days in flower. It was under 100-day total grow. And the flower ended up super dank. And to just play the devil's advocate, I wouldn't have necessarily been able to grow them. Like with the Blue Dream, maybe I could have vegged them out, got them in larger pots until they showed sex and then flipped them. But I'm kind of like a vintage guy. Like I want to grow as many seeds as possible. And like each one represents like that vintage. And if it's really good, I'll try and get a cut and keep it. But typically I'm just like, I want to grow the next 6 things that I can, or the next one thing and like, 2 or 3 plants of it at a time and look for the special pheno. But at the same time, if going to this person's question with the sea of green, you want to basically give yourself some variety, but at the same time have a bunch of plants around the same height so that you're not dealing with like I had right there. I had Platinum Yeti were 44 inches tall or whatever, and the Sour 76 were like 24 to 36. So it's when you don't understand what the genetics going to do after you flip, it makes things a lot more difficult.
Yeah. But I mean, if you have a dedicated, mother space or something that you could feed your grow, you also have the whole advantage of now I have a whole nother grow space. I can just flower in this bedroom instead of veg in this bedroom, maybe, so that opens that up too.
Yeah, and I think the perpetual should be a goal eventually if people have high consumption rate, and even if they don't, if they have people that they can supply or start making RSO just to have it on hand. So if anybody gets sick, they can make that available to people. But I'm curious, Tao, if you have any thoughts about, or actually, I'm going to pass it to Brandon first for this one and say, or second in this case, about Hills Grows question. If you had no plant count, which is something you're familiar with, what are your thoughts on Sea of Green from clone, 0 veg days besides the clone time?
So if you do it, if you don't do any veg time at all and you just do it straight from clone, you have to make sure that your like nutrient regimen is on point because you can't have any hiccups, right? Because you still want them to bolt for those first initial weeks, so that way they can, get large enough to where you're going to maximize the yield. But I always kind of like to at least give them just a couple of days. At least they can get established in that, larger volume of soil. I actually just transplanted. This time I did 16 instead of 25, and those ones are going to be, um, I think I'm going to do untopped one bed, and then topped will be the other bed. But I'm going to veg them for probably like 10 days or maybe even 2 weeks, depending. We'll see.
I personally like to veg a little bit because you can shape the plants to the space, whether it's a grow tent or even in the commercial scale, like Brandon does beds or tables. You can see it's nature. So like inevitably there's going to be maybe like one runtier plant, one plant that's a little bit bigger that needs to be bent down and tucked underneath a trellis or whatever, or tied or topped. Having that little bit of flexibility allows you a lot of control. I'm curious, Tao,
Yeah,
do you have any thoughts about this sea of green question?
I have some thoughts, man. I met this dude who grew a ton of weed and like long time ago, and he basically almost kept them in the cloning, like an arrow cloner type thing, throughout the whole life. So it wasn't as tightly packed though, I guess. And he like had he customized the holes. He put holes in this plexiglass shit, and he was getting like an ounce off each stick. But he had the right genetics. He went through a shit ton of genetics to find the one strain that would grow properly like he wanted to in this situation that he had, and he would just grow them in the circle, like a 2-inch circle, with the roots in water. And yeah, he would harvest an ounce off of each plant. There'd be 16 in a tray, so, or whatever. I forget, even more maybe. And so yeah, it's definitely doable, but I wouldn't do it because you have to be on top of it and make sure everything's right. And yeah, I would know. Try it, man. Yeah, definitely try it. But if it were me, I would like, because it has to have roots to grow. So even if, I guess it depends on how good the roots are. Yeah, as soon as it gets established and whenever the final container is, then it can
I
just
think the most
grow.
like
So
yeah, I think the most ideal would be like a DWC. That would probably be the most ideal because you can
yeah,
deliver the exact nutrient all the time, make sure it's always available, and the roots would grow like nuts in there.
yeah, that's all. And you can keep them in a thing
Yeah, like
like that.
Loki.
Yep.
Exactly. Loki has a good setup for that. I like how
Yeah,
those
yeah.
ones, those big ones.
The thing that made me think of Loki when you're talking about that Tao is like he almost has what you're talking about, just a little bit larger scale. Like he made these tables himself with I think like PVC on the top, and he just cut out holes and he drops these plants into them, and he just flowers straight into these tables. So this is currently
Yep.
in veg, but
And I would also say if just make more plants. And if there's no room, take plants out of the space that you have, and you still have the sea of green. The best you could do. If you lowball and don't have enough plants and don't fill the space, then you can't you can't quickly make more. But you can take out plants that won't fit. So there's a thought.
that is a good point. I think that the sea of green certainly has its benefits. I think plant count limits a lot of people. We wish we could grow this many. Some people are like, fuck it, I'm going to grow as many as I want. Rebel with the cause. And overgrowing the planet is usually that cause. But I think it's tough because if you're given the right and they could say like, hey, you can grow 6 plants and it's not that restrictive, people are like, yeah, I guess I'll just keep it within that to avoid any issue. But at the same time, I understand we come from a completely unregulated market where there was no rules, regulations, etc. And so those were the people that kept the plant alive and still are in many cases. And, people on this very panel have been to prison over this plant and, making concentrate or whatever. So it's very real that people's lives and freedom are still at risk over this plant. We've got people in the UK and other places internationally where if they are found out for growing, um, can and will be arrested or and have been in the past. I've talked to handfuls of people over there who've gotten busted for home growing, like not even pushing, just growing for something for their fucking selves. It's ridiculous. It's crazy, but it's still the case a lot of places, even in this very country in the US. If you're in the wrong state, you can get yourself wrapped up with some very serious charges. The cultivation puts it up to a whole nother, even just possession is enough to wrap you up. I mean, shout out to Last Prisoner Project. I'll always shout them out. But if you can, make sure to donate or write letters to people that are wrongfully locked up for nonviolent cannabis crimes right here in the U.S. and all over the place. It's just something that needs to be changed, and they're doing a great job with their lobbying efforts and getting regulations changed and
Yeah.
getting people out.
Speaking of that, a little shameless promotion. We usually, this show usually represents on the Chatathon every year, and the Chatathon that Let's Be Buds is putting on for the fundraiser for Last Prisoner Project. It's coming up. It's on the 16th of this month, so a couple more weeks.
I need to talk to Uncle Rick and see if I haven't already said yes. I would love to make sure that we get over there if there's a slot,
Yeah,
and if not,
there's a spot for us for sure.
all right, great. Well, I know we've done it for the last couple of years. The money that is donated is usually matched by Dutchies, who shout out to them because that's awesome. They double it up to $1 million worth of donations, and each year that becomes, big money to
Yeah,
go
we have
towards a great
news
cause.
here that I'd love to share because of our help with getting money donated and signing up through Dutchies for the doubling program. Dutchies fulfilled their obligations and met the $1 million goal. That was just last month. We pushed them over the edge and got them there. So everybody should have a big pat on their back to be able to say that, not only did we help, donate $1 million to the Last Prisoner Project, but another $1 million was fucking thrown on the books for that. So hell yeah, I was really, really, really happy when I saw that.
That makes a
Yeah,
difference.
I want to chime in quick because I saw someone posted about how Last Prisoner Project is a scam and all this, but every single charity is a scam. And the fact that a lot of the collection goes to administrative costs. And it's true. Some charities are almost 100% go to administrative costs, like 10% get to the people. But I watched Hash Church recently, where there was a person on there praising and thanking Last Prisoner Project for helping get him the fuck out of jail. So even if they are corrupt motherfuckers taking more than they should, they're still doing good and they're still helping people. So that is the point I'm making. And so
Well,
that's
I mean,
that, right?
that's the only thing that I've seen because they're open book over there. You can go right on
Yeah,
the page and see where their
and
money goes.
you could see. So
Is administration costs, right? And
and
the
paying
cool
people
thing is there's
basically.
people on the payroll. Stephanie Shepard is one of them that comes to mind that was helped to get out of jail. And guess what? Now
Right.
she is working for them.
Served 10
Is
years
on the
for
payroll.
conspiracy. Served 10 years for
And
conspiracy. Didn't even get caught with weed.
you
She
know,
she got busted for text messages or some bullshit. She did 10
probably
years. They got her out, and now
quite
she's
a
a big
few
part.
people on the payroll there probably deserve it too. And
Yeah,
some
exactly. That's what
people
I'm saying.
are, like kind of like paid spokespeople, which is okay too in my mind.
Here's
Get
the
some
thing. If you don't
celebs that
make
are on the books, shit like that, whatever. But like I'm saying, the dude was testifying, and I've seen another person testifying how Last Prisoner Project helped him get out and helped him when he got out adjust to the new world that you freaking like. If you go away for 3 years, it's probably a different reality when you step out. So yeah,
if you don't make a dollar incentive,
that's
nobody's
it.
going to do it, right? Who volunteers for work? If you didn't make $1 billion or $1 million in the past, like if you're not extremely wealthy, nobody really has the luxury of working for free. So the people that are doing this, at least they're doing it. Somebody's doing it, right? So the administration costs are going to people that are actually doing a good job. They raised $1 million over the past, I don't know, 2, 3 years. Now it's $2 million because they got a sponsor to match it up to $1 million. So that's a pretty damn good job. Even if I think, what is it, 50, 40, whatever percentage does go to administration costs, that's raising way more than any one of us independently would have. Let's just be
Right.
honest. None of us would have donated anywhere close to that. But bringing the communities together and making it happen is doing a very real good. So amazing stuff on their behalf. And with all that being said, look forward to the upcoming chatathon, and shout out to Let's Be Buds and all the people that are doing great stuff out there, Last Prisoner Project, and the people that work with them, cannabis brands here in California and otherwise that are donating some of their proceeds towards that very same cause. So shout out to all the people doing good work there. Continuing on, we talked a lot about some of the earlier parts of veg and things like that. One of the things I wanted to mention, has everybody talked about the idea with the Hills Grows questions about the if you didn't have a plant count? I think Tao Spartan, did you mention your answer for that one?
Yeah, I think I started with my answer. I'm pretty sure
Perfect.
I covered it.
Okay, good, good, good. So I wanted to pass it to you, and then I'll go to Brandon second because he's going to be on about the 15-minute mark. But going to lighting, there's a lot of talk about lighting, especially in the veg space, from spectrum to the actual light, because some people grow under T5s still, right? T5 LEDs maybe, or a smaller, lower powered LED, or maybe under a ceramic metal halide, or maybe under a metal halide, or HPS, who knows? But maybe talking about lighting options, spectrum options, and the different things that you might use, and the ones that you're actually using for the veg cycle.
I'm sorry, what was the last part that you just said?
So talking about the different lights
Lighting,
that you
right?
can use for veg, and then the ones that you're actually using throughout the veg cycle.
Oh, there, yeah. That was a thing that early in my growing career, the veg light was always my worst light that I had, whatever that could be. That could have been a fucking regular light, right? Like a light bulb. Because my best light was the flower light. It was always the flower light. Um, but now as I've progressed a little in my career, and now I'm lucky enough to work for a lighting company, I've been able to throw in a veg lights that actually have spectrums designed for veg, and that usually means a full spectrum with added blues, just very generally speaking. But being able to run uh, under a spectrum like that, it is an advantage. I've been able to see the advantage of being able to grow, tighter internode spacings and plants that don't get real lanky and stuff like that. So I can see the advantage of that. And then with the advent of the LED lights, before LEDs, I didn't even like metal halide in veg. I liked the T5s because you could slam them right down close to the plants, and it was such a good spread. It seemed like the way that it spread light that you'd always get those short, plants that you wanted. Uh, but when the LEDs came out in with the blue, then now and now that they're not boards, that they're like spread out on bars, and that's kind of what I have. It's like a bar light with that blue. I'm in love with that because now you can slam that light all the way down if you want to, still have that great spread, and still have that same color that you're looking for to get you the same kind of plant morphology as it grows. So for me, I'm using an LED, a bar light specifically, and I love it for that reason. It's for because you can also save a ton of power because now you can bring the light a lot closer to the plants and then just dim it down and still get your same PPF. And in a veg, it doesn't have to be super intense, so you can get away with all of those things to save a ton of money if you want to. And for me, in my little home grow, where it's easy enough to just move one light, not a big deal. If in a big grow, I could see where that'd be a pain in the ass if moving lights. You'd have to come up with a different solution because that's just not feasible to fucking move lights all the time.
I'm with you. I do miss the T5s a little bit. They put out like so little light that you could get them real close, and they never like burnt a plant ever. Like I had plants grow into it and they were totally fine. Like didn't even get burnt at all. And they just made like fat leaf, short, broad, healthy plants, and they put out a little bit of warmth even in the cold season. It just like seemed to keep your environment in the right space. It just worked. It was like you never overlit it. With the LEDs now, like Spartan's talking about, if you have one of those uh, bar style LEDs in your veg space, just be very careful. Make sure you dim, make sure you take a reading because it is easy early in veg to overdo it. With that said, I want to give Brandon a chance. I wrote down a couple of topics for the veg show, and I'm going to kind of have you do a lightning round. I'm just going to run through the ones that we haven't hit and starting from the one that we just covered. So, do you have any thoughts on different lighting styles and then lighting spectrum for the veg cycle?
I also run LEDs, full spectrum, lots of blue, lots of red. Um, I run the both Aries, so I also run those in my flower room as well. So I'm vegging under the exact same light. I just change the setting on the light. Um, Kind of just like if it was going through a season. So there's like an autumn, a summer, or there's like a spring, summer, and autumn setting or whatever, and it just kind of plays around with the blue to red ratios. But full spectrum, lots of blue, and I just keep them dim pretty low. Uh, I don't uh, I don't run like super high PPFD. There for a second. Um, so I don't run like really high PPFD. Maybe like I don't know when they're nice and established. I'm probably running around like 500 ppfd, and then I'll kind of go up all the way up to maybe 700-800 at the highest in flower, and then kind of ramp back down.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think sometimes people push a little bit too high on the PPFD.
What are you guys using for lights for cloning?
So I just set my clones underneath the same light that I veg under here. Well, here at my home grow.
Me too. I always have. I always just put it in the corner of my veg room, and it's just going to be in the edge, the small PPFD that runs off the edges of the space that coming off the regular grow lights.
Yep,
Because,
I'm
but you
here.
can buy. They've got plenty of different options for different
I mean, I
different
have
grow lights. I just need something small. You don't need a lot. I don't think you need a lot of PPFD for
They
clone.
even they sell the dome with the lights that you put right on top, like there's a groove for the LED
Super
lights.
sprouter, the super sprouter. That's what I got me into the T5.
It
It had the
probably,
dome with the light that runs right down the center. But
yeah.
it worked, you know, it gets the job done. And I had that and ran it for a lot. I gifted it to somebody to get them growing. But I'm with Spartan. I have like my veg cabinet set up where I've got my light and then I've got a white kind of faux wall, and then the cabinet goes a little bit deeper. So if I want to do clones, I just pull out that little faux wall and I have clones on that second shelf that's like up on the back, which the light kind of indirectly shines over onto it. You really do not need a lot of intense light to get clones to root. I think the more indirect, less intense, the better for clones for sure. Brandon, continuing forward with some of the other things that we might talk about for the rest of the show. Nutrients and soil mixes. I know that you've got a few different things at Bokashi Earthworks from the humates and different NutriPots and things like that. And from soil mixes, you were the person who got me into 40% aeration in my soil mixes. And I'm curious if you have any special thoughts on veg in terms of what nutrient you would use from your product line or any special soil mix.
I definitely like to give them calcium silica, but what's really important for veg, you obviously need, NPK, but your calcium and nitrogen are really important because what I see is nitrogen kind of increases logarithmically with the increase in biomass. So the need for nitrogen increases, but the problem with nitrogen is that it's so volatile in any different form because it is converted through biological processes into different forms and often into atmospheric gas. And so the use efficiency for nitrogen is lower than any other nutrients. It's one of the things that is in most demand. So monitoring the biomass and your kind of nitrogen levels is kind of really important, but also calcium, because even though calcium isn't considered a macronutrient, it's considered a secondary nutrient, especially for cannabis. They love calcareous soils. They love a lot of calcium. And what I've seen is that it's kind of like a 2-to-1 calcium to nitrogen. If we were looking at the amount in solution, so if you're running 200 ppm calcium, you want at least 100 ppm of nitrate nitrogen in solution. So that's really important, and that's going to affect things like structure. It's going calcium does a bunch of different things, but it's super important to try to front load. I've talked about this for many years. Front loading calcium and getting your calcium levels up in your tissue um, is one of the things that I like to do. Uh, in veg, if I'm doing like a longer veg time. If I'm just doing a quick flip, I just want to make sure that clones that I start with come from really healthy mom stock.
I think that's really important, and I always hear people talk about that, but it's easy to say, less easy to do. And I think everyone says like, "Oh, I do that," but I've seen you lead by example, and many others that do it well. If you can keep good, healthy clone mom stock, then your clones end up better, and your veg ends up better, and your flower ends up better. It all starts from that clone mom and veg room, really. That's why I wanted to focus on this because it's not as glorious. It's not where the shiny, sparkly, amazing buds that smell and taste amazing that we all love are coming from necessarily, but it is the thing that sets us up for that. And continuing on just a little bit to sort of
Consist
wrap.
Consistency with those clones is really important too. So if you take all clones that have all three nodes on it, you take them all at 4 inches, they're all the same. And then you go and put that into a section or an area under a light, and they're all uniform. You're gonna have better results.
100%. And that leads me into the last point that we'll kind of wrap up with later in the show, but I'm curious if you have thoughts on it before you get going into these last 5 minutes. Things to avoid and maybe some lessons learned from veg process gone awry or grows that you've seen that you maybe needed to rescue, etc.
Oh, so yeah, so if your veg room is infested with insects or it's got pathogens, don't try to flower it. Just get rid of it. It's better to just it's better. And so many people get focused, especially when there's investment. People kind of are like, "Oh, we need this, we need," and they're kind of desperate. They're like, "Don't do it. Just get rid of the fucking problems. Start fresh, so you don't have to deal with it. You're gonna save a lot of money in the long run." But be vigilant about and do your due diligence when it comes to your integrated pest management. Because if you're doing longer veg times, that's time that they're more susceptible to insects and pests and pathogens. And it's one of the reasons why I'd love to see green where I'll take real nice healthy clones, I'll go throw them in my beds, and I'll actually post a little thing on my story after this because I just took a picture. I did it with the high divorce rates. All nice, really healthy clones, put them in the bed, and I'm not gonna veg very long, but you'll be able to see the turnover is a lot faster and you're using less resources too. So that's one of the things to think about in veg. If you can find genetic selections that grow, maybe they bolt 4 times their size, right? So that they're going to do yield and that's what I'm saying when you transition them when they go to from veg to flower and they go through that bolting process. If they get large, that's one of the things that you can look at. But that time that you veg, especially when you start scaling things out, because I like to do more plants, but smaller plants in the same area to fill in the same amount of canopy, just because I can cut down the expenses associated with having a longer veg time. And so that's going to equate to water, power. It's going to equate to nutrients and labor and time.
All good points, and they really do impact the overall uh, speed of the grow and costs. One final thing, I guess, before we let you get running, Okie Grower, I think it was earlier, asked they were having some issues rooting one of their plants. I think they said it took as long as 28 days, which is one of the longer times I've seen. Do you have any thoughts or suggestions for them on how to maybe strike roots a little bit quicker when they're going through their cloning process?
So, one would be that sterilization of the media, but also test your plants for both Fusarium and Hoplite virus. Because if you don't do that, unfortunately, the guy that I was testing with, the guy died recently. I just found that out like a week ago. So, make sure you test your plants because if you're having a rooting a problem, it could be, you know, a bunch of different problems, but hoplite and fusarium are pretty bad. Also, the media itself, making sure your equipment is sterilized before you use it, and that you switch tools or sterilized tools between switching moms or um, you know pruning and stuff, because a lot of things can be vertically transmitted. It's you have to take a really holistic approach when it comes to all of this because a lot of times there's not just one straightforward answer when it comes to approaching how to best manage any one of these systems because everything can be a little bit different and so different situations call for different actions and the action that you take is really contingent on the best way to produce the highest quality and quantity with whatever's with the least amount of overhead.
It's like a lot of people get angry at lawyers because often they say like it depends. But I think any expert from a pest expert to a grow expert will say it depends. It depends on your situation. It depends on
Yeah.
your goal. It depends on your resources. It depends on your environment. And that's just the honest to goodness truth. And if you looked at situation by situation individually, you can't just paint with such a broad brushstroke and say like this one method works best for everybody always, all the time because
Yes.
there's going to be an exception out there. And we can give you sort of
It
quote
would
unquote best practices, but at the same time, realize that, not there's no one size fits all for growing.
it would be like painting. It would be like taking a picture of a tree and saying, "This is a tree. This is what a tree looks like. This is what all trees look like." And if somebody didn't know better, they might think, "Oh, this is what all trees look like." But that's not an act, So you have to really take into account, you know, the system, whatever it is as a whole. Very important. The just critical thinking about things is what I think makes a lot of good growers, because if you can adapt to a situation and overcome whatever challenges it is that you're facing, um, it feels good, and it creates drive and motivation to do more.
Critical thinking is one of the many skills that growing teaches, and that's why I really love and advocate that many people start to grow, because we need more critical thinkers in society. With that said, Brandon, it's about that 1 hour mark, and you said you'd get running about the hour, so I figure we give you a chance to give your final thoughts and shout outs before you get running.
Yeah, it's always good to chat with you guys. I do have a lot of stuff going on, so I actually have to do a little bit more work here. And then it's a big, long day tomorrow, too. So I'll talk to you guys soon. And in the meantime, if you guys want to check out any of the stuff on Bokashi Earthworks or the Seed Vault website, go check that out. And I'll talk to you guys next week.
Cheers,
Peace
Brandon.
out.
Cheers, Brandon. Thank you so much for stopping in.
Go on.
Bye.
One thing I can think of with the cloning that I tried early on, and I got away from doing it because it required me to go buy some shit. I hate that. But it was they had these little, I can't remember. I think they were called the green pads or something. They emitted CO2. They were like these little things. And I would stick them in my clone dome, and they would up the CO2 levels in my clone dome. And I do remember that would make me strike roots a lot not a lot faster. I think 4 or 5 days quicker than normal in my own testing. So that's one thing that I can tell you for sure that I've done in my testing is if you use elevated CO2 levels in your clone domes, you can strike roots faster that way. As long as you got everything else on point, your environment, we've already beat that horse to death already, but as long as your environment's cool too. I'm not saying it's going to, CO2 is one of those crazy ones where your environment has to already be on point. So it's one of the things that you think about last. Then
Icing on the cake.
sure.
It's like icing on the cake kind of thing, because like you've already
Exactly.
got everything else baked and prepared, but the icing is it'll make it better for sure, but it's not necessary. Uh, in all circumstances. However, some might argue that case. Getting back to Okie Grower followed up and said, what if it's genetics? Like, what if it's a clone that's known for being slow? And I think they're saying that it was like a Mac 1 or a Mac cross taking 22 to 28 days. That still seems really slow to me. I honestly, I'm very into nerdy about the genetic history and lineages and differentiation between one strain to the next. So I'm the first one to like accept when somebody says like it's strain dependent. If they're going to talk about like light cycle, nutrients, like whatever, I'll get down into the weeds with you. But when we're talking about like rooting times, I haven't seen a strain that consistently roots over 21 days. Most of them are like 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Fucking Chem 91. Think about this. What is it? 9 years plus 24, uh, 33-year-old plant still roots in under 14 days. Okay. So if the Mac, which is a relatively recent phenomena, or a Mac cross is having issues rooting, I think that there might be some pathogenic or sterilization issues going on within the environment. It could be, and he's saying that it was even potentially tested for viroids and viruses. Maybe not all of them. I think that one of the best ways to clean a cut is to do tissue culture and then do a hot and a cold treatment. So you can heat sterilize and cold sterilize and kill off a huge percentage, and then do another tissue culture where you're taking the meristem of that tissue culture to get the very cleanest possible version of that cutting, and you're starting
Or
pretty much fresh.
or you do what I call the poor man tissue culture and you just pop another seed of that strain. Be like, fuck it, reset.
That's the way if you're a pheno hunter and you've got seeds of it available. But I'm talking like if Chem 91 got hop latent viroid, or if your
Oh
Mac
yeah.
1 or whatever it is, your prize pony. Because I'm with you, Spartan. Trust me, shit. I have currently 0 cuts in my possession, and I'm popping seeds every single run because I just think there's people out there that are growing cuts. They're gonna keep growing them for a long time, and there's going to be stuff that's going to come along and replace it. It's really cool to have stables. Like you've got a stable, Smiley and others have stables where like it's awesome to like get to try like, oh, you've got these 5 or 6 strains and they can consistently produce and like put out. I'm just growing for myself and having fun with it. I'm not necessarily, if I had a caregiver thing set up where I had patients, I would be much more likely to keep a certain number of clones in my stable. But with that said, we picked up where we were talking about lighting. Spartan had talked about his thoughts on lighting and veg, and then we passed it to Brandon to do a lightning round where he went through all of that different stuff. I'm gonna pass it to Tao to talk about lighting, and then I'm gonna go fill my water. I'm gonna keep listening, but I'm gonna be off camera for a little bit. So Tao, do you have any thoughts on veg lighting, both the spectrum and the styles of lighting? Like we were talking a little bit earlier about, the T5s. I know back in the day, sometimes people use metal halides. So thoughts on the options and then what you actually use.
Yeah, basically, the first time I switched to LEDs, my clones fried because I had to lay it way too high, and in the other spot they like got all red after a while. So I don't know. Right now I'm using like a fluorescent fixture with LED bulbs in it, and I have a 100 watt, an old HLG 100 watt, and that's all I got going right now, pretty much.
And everything's been going good underneath those as opposed to stuff you've used in the past? Like if you compared that, what you got going on right now, just as good as ever, or would you rather have had a more?
No, well, right now I only have a small plant. So yeah, as I grow even, I'm gonna need more light. So I'm gonna figure that out. I do have a Mars, what do I have? An FPCE, I forget what it is, but I have a few other ones and I have a few HPSs too, but I don't know if I'm gonna bust those out, but we'll see. Um yeah, and I was wondering what specific do they make specific lights for veg? I guess they do at LED, right? What does
Yeah.
Grandmaster level have?
Well, the general, honestly, when you look at it, it's kind of like almost a mimic of what we did with metal halide and HPS, where the metal halide is kind of like your white with blue light, and HPS is kind of like your full spectrum with uh red or yellow, I guess. I guess it's more yellow with HPS. It's that it doesn't have as much of the red, but so the LEDs are doing the same thing. They'll get a full spectrum, which gives you just that broad white light, and then they add a little bit more blue for a veg light, and they usually add a little more red when you go to a flower light. And that's kind of just the real general broad approach. And that's how what they're doing. And usually with the reds, they're using 660 nanometer reds because it's the most efficient LEDs we got out there right now. And then depending on what brand you use, you might get different efficiencies. But that's generally how it's gone. And then you can
Right.
get into the weeds and start saying what kind of reds other than 660. Then there's far reds, which pushes into past 700s. And that goes into a whole nother thing that I could talk about endlessly about the Emerson effect and
Mm-hmm.
and some people using it to put the plants to sleep at the end of the cycle. Uh, that one I think I haven't been able to replicate so much as far as some people claim that if you flash far red at the end of the cycle, it'll signal plants to go to photosynthesis too faster, and then you'll pick up time and have shorter harvests. I've noticed shorter harvests just running far red during the flowering cycle without having to do anything special, just running far red with the 660, and that gets you the Emerson effect, which makes your plant photosynthesize more efficiently. So your lights aren't any more efficient, but the plants underneath it are photosynthesizing more efficiently, and I think that's what causes shorter harvest windows. And I'm still unsold on the idea of flashing far red at the end making a big difference.
So I just saw, and I almost covered it, but we just did like a science episode last week, and somebody sent me, or I saw a post recently where they were talking about a 13-hour light cycle increasing yield, and even increasing certain cannabinoids and terpenes in certain cultivars. They weren't even taking advantage of the flashing far red at the end. That was kind of what I had seen it pitched as, like they go to sleep faster, so you can give them an extra hour of light. In so facto, you get a 13-hour day. You're giving them an extra hour of light every day, and you can essentially increase yield, was the thought. This experiment found that even without using far red, a large percentage of plants just were able to. Some of them had issues and wouldn't flower. So there's used to that 12-12, and that was really the divide. So it is interesting. Strain dependence isn't just hokey poke, bro science bullshit that, podcasters and home growers are talking about. It really matters. And like autoflowers are a perfect example. Like those are clearly, they don't give a shit about your light cycle. They're just going to do their thing and they're going to grow and die and then do whatever, depending on, how much light they get. They'll maybe get giant or be tiny little popsicle sticks. But there's some really amazing autoflower growers out there. Shout out to Full Duplex. I think he goes by Mandalorian. Or no, not Mandalorian anymore. He's Gnome Automatics now. Just
No
saw a cool
monomatics. Yep. Dan out there.
Dan. Shout out to Dan the man. Been on the Autoflower network for over a decade, and he just did a cool video with I think it was Shango Los of Shaving Fire, where he walked through the garden and showed not just his cannabis garden, but also the food and stuff that he was growing. So big shout out to Dan. He's been on the show many times.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome, dude. Still love that anvil. He still has it too. I don't know what generation he's worked it pretty long now, so he's probably on 12. What is he? F12s on that thing yet?
It's crazy, man. He's put a lot of work into it for sure, and it's very iconic looking and like the name, like what I've seen and heard. But that being said, I think we did a good job talking about the lighting spectrum and different things that you can take advantage of, both in veg and flower even. Light cycles, I think, is one thing that we could touch on that I forgot to write down in my little show note. But do you guys do like the 20 on, 4 off, 18-6, or some sort of different veg light cycle? I'll start with you, Spartan.
I know 18.6. I've always done 18.6, never really changed it. If I could do anything, I'd probably try to cut that even lower. I wouldn't go more. I don't. I'm already vegging quickly enough for what I'm doing. So throwing more light into the situation is going to be more plant control. So I'm going to have to either cycle plants through faster or it's going to mess up my timings. So for me, I've got it right where I want it. But I would, if I was going to go anyway with it, my cycle and change it anyway, I might go 17 hours rather than 19 hours.
You know what's funny is I actually veg 17 on, 7 off, and I have for years now, and hadn't noticed any significant difference. It worked just fine. Sometimes I'll go 24 on just because I don't feel like running a timer. And that's honestly like true that I just don't feel like setting it up. I still run the old pin timers and stuff, and I know that they have apps and like they're smart lights and stuff out there. I don't have one of them yet. I'm still running my old like first/second gen LEDs now. But they work and they get the job done. So sometimes I go 24 on, 0 off, but most of the time I'm running 17 on, 7 off. And I'll even do that like in the quote flower tent for maybe a week or two just to get them acclimated and adjusted, do some of the final training before I get them flipped if they're not large enough size yet, which sometimes in the colder months typically will be the seasons that might happen. I don't add tons of heat during the non-light cycle, even though I run most of the time during the lights are on during nighttime to offset the different heat and differences and things like that. But Tao, I'm curious, what are your veg light cycles? What do you run under?
Well, yeah, I don't mind 20 on and 4 off, but it also depends on the time of year. If it's really hot out and how big the light, like now it's not so much a factor with the LEDs because they don't give off much heat, but if when it was hot out, I would try and run them, I could go down to 18 and 6 without worrying. And I definitely believe that they would like some off time. So I never go more than 20 hours on and 4 hours off. But yeah, during the cold time, I leave it on for 20 hours, and I don't think they mind. And but I was intrigued with that candle, what is it, candlestick, candlelight, whatever it was, where you 12 hours on what, and then like you turn it on for an hour
Yeah,
during the
slamp
on
routine.
cycle. Yeah, okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Like 12 hours on, and then during the
That's
12 hours
less,
off,
isn't
you
it?
turn
Isn't
it
that
on
less
for an
hours
hour.
running?
They do give
Yeah.
less. That's to me a greenhouse thing. It literally evolved from a greenhouse technique. I don't think that it should be run indoors personally. The one person that I see pushing that is kind of questionable uh in their scientific rigor. And I won't get any further. I'm not going to make any personal attacks. I've enjoyed some of their stories and been entertained. However, I'd push back. I'm more on the doc cocoa side of the lighting discussion than the other person who I'm not going to name necessarily because I don't
Right,
want to. People will post this onto their that
but
person's thing and then they'll come
you never
attack.
know. I mean, like I'm saying, like it's all situational too. If there's someone who, if the business is about to go out of business, whatever, they need to save every penny. Maybe it'll help. But
Well, you're not actually wrong to
it,
talk about that because the
yeah,
California legal market has a lot of really struggling growers, distributors, and
and I
storefronts.
know
So
people who have done it and are like, hell yeah, I'm doing it because I can use less electricity. So teach their own. But yeah, I think the plants will definitely be
I think
happier
the
and
people that are
better.
saying hell yeah aren't doing like objective side by side to say, okay, I had the same clone and then I had a 3x3 tent and I ran one under the gas lantern routine and I ran
And
one
then right
under
next to it.
16:6 and then twelve
Yeah.
twelve. The exact same plant, the exact same nutrient cycle, everything.
Mhm.
Because when you actually go ahead and do that, yeah, it costs a little bit more, but you get way fucking more in return. It's not even close. Because like you're arguing with the laws of thermodynamics and it's
Yeah,
physics
I was going to bring up
from a first
DLI too
principles.
with the light hours too. So the DLI, if you have really intense light, you can run them for less time too. If you
You can
like,
push
that's all a
so
factor.
hard. The
So
plant, most people aren't even coming close to what you can push a cannabis plant. It can take like corn levels of light or higher. And when you apply CO2,
yeah,
they
that's
say that
all.
you only need to give like 1,000, but that Chandra et al. Went up to like 1,500 and I think even 2,000 ppfd.
Dude, that
And it
lighting
kept going
company,
up.
Pose, is preaching that, and they're like, "You guys can't do it. We'll send our freaking you know, SOP guys over and show you what you got to do to be able to use the amount of light we're providing you with." And that's what they did. They came in. You have to use these nutrients with this much CO2, and this is what's will happen. So
Yeah, like
yeah,
people
I believe you.
underestimate what cannabis is capable of because like the Chandra et al. Study, I think they're some of the better scientists in the cannabis space, but a lot of the research that we've covered, admittedly, has been fairly poor. When we look at the plants, they're not healthy. They're awkward sizes. They're wonky looking. You know, there's blatant deficiencies. They're in too small of pots. They're too closely bunched together. They have too little airflow and things like there's lots of issues in these grows. So if you dial them in, you can get much higher potential output. And when people like Fos or anybody who has a specialist come in and dial things in, they can get higher. But like the Chandra at all, like when they went up to like that 2,000, the graph was like this. It was like, 500, 750, 1,000, and then it went like a little bit over, but it was still going up to like 1,500, and then it kept going up to like the 2,000. It just didn't keep spiking. So it's a matter of efficiency, and it's like really hard to generate 2,000 ppfd of light in a single spot. You have to have really good lights, and
Cost of operation, man, goes up tremendously because you're dumping heat into the room that you have to remove. And you got
and
to,
your electrical is one of the most high output costs. So if you can minimize that, then you're better off. And I think a lot of people are happy to run at 700 or 800 or whatever and still get 80 or 90% of the same result, right? So it's really a matter of diminishing returns. And when you're battling razor thin margins and people that are in unregulated markets that aren't paying any taxes and aren't following any rules and regulations or doing any testing, um, cutting costs matters and keeping the costs down is a big important factor, even for the home grower at a certain point, because these mass producers are going to start producing things that are, it's like going to be cheaper than you can grow it yourself. And it might not be the quality. It's definitely not going to be the quality that you can grow yourself at home, but for somebody, a gram's a gram. And, if it's got enough THC and minor cannabinoids and terpenes and whatever, it'll get most people through.
what I'm excited for in lighting technology is playing with spectrum and not just like we kind of are talking about it with having a different spectrum for veg over a different spectrum for flower. Yeah, that's cool. But now, like with the technology to like with the lighting, that it's not just Grandmaster level. There's other companies too. I just know about those lights, but the spectrum tuning, I think Fos has some. Brandon was talking about it with the
Science,
season
think grow
science.
LED, grow
Yep,
cropter.
I think it's going to be, a year, 2 years from now, the major grow light, every major grow light, company is going to have a spectrum tuning option because it's going to be that's the newest thing. And what I'm excited about just playing with in the garden, seeing what I can get is not just spectrum tuning like we were talking about for veg or flower, but within the day. So right now, what I'm playing with, the current one that I have that I'm excited for, I'm getting ready. I think this next harvest will be my first plant that I harvest out of this spectrum schedule that is set up, but I've got it set up with a controller so that during the day, it starts out, I call it my base spectrum, which is just my regular flower spectrum. Uh, it starts out with that, but then for the 3 hours in the middle of the day, it goes to a blue spectrum, a blue heavy spectrum, almost like a veg spectrum, and it simulates the high noon sun. And so I do that for 3 hours in the middle of my cycle, and then I go back to the flower cycle. So that's what I'm doing for this one. But to be able to switch stuff within the day like that, I think is cool. And the reason I'm doing that is because I just recently read a white paper, which I should have wrote down so that I could, when I talk about it, would have the name of it. But it showed that there's a caveat. As long as that you have a full spectrum available, so you've got your regular your good PPF full spectrum available in flowering, added blue increased cannabinoids, specifically THC and a couple other ones. And so with no loss to terpenes and things like that. So for me, it's like, why wouldn't you want to add blue? And then I figured out how can I add blue but not have the some what you could say side effects of adding blue, which would be, you know, less yield, uh, tighter internode spacing when maybe you don't need it. I'm just doing it by adding it, but a little bit during the day rather than blasting it all day with blue. So seeing if that'll make an effect.
I go with the approach of I just added a sort of spike in the blue, but it's much smaller than the reds. My predominant source of light is white, but then I have peaks in the spectrum at red and blue in the 660, 730, and 440 nanometer blue. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just to show this was a while ago when I DIY'd my LED, but I'm going to go back a little bit just to show. Uh, I was absolutely a new, total noob, no electrical experience. Bought myself a little LED to put together, and here's my Wago connector situation. Old plug,
The
figured it
meanwhile
out.
driver.
Meanwhile, driver, yep, they make a good product. It hasn't given me any issues. But you can see here, this is the what I was talking about. I've got 660 on this. It's called an anthelion or like a light halo. And then this is another 660 light halo. The one in the middle has 440, 440, 440, and then 660, 660, 660. And I put a
Nice.
little 730 nanometer in the middle of that.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
that
That
bolts
runs the whole time. The 732.
yeah, that runs
Cool.
20 or not 24 hours, but like 12 hours during the light cycle. And that's to get that what I can show over here, which is the Emerson effect, which I really love the graphic of because I think when you talk about it, I always talk about like the numbers or whatever. I do a little sunset, so my white light turns, and then I do like a sunrise. So that's the anthelions or whatever. And then when I pan up, there's actually two cobs that kick on, which is going to make the light look basically pure daylight white. And so that is how I've got mine set up. Old school cobs with the timber grow lights. They're not even in business anymore. So shout out to them. They're a San Diego based company. This is the Emerson effect, though, that Spartan had mentioned earlier. You've got 660 nanometer red and how efficient it is here on the left for photosynthesis. 730 nanometer red is on the right. It's a tiny little bar. It's actually not very efficient. It was considered to not even be part of the, um, you know,
Power.
the spectrum for whatever it's called, the 400 to 700 nanometer range, um, PPFD range or whatever, the photonic flux light density spectrum or whatever. It was for a long time not considered until this experiment was done. And they saw, oh, it's a little bit active. And then when they combine the two of them, you see the purple and the yellow. That's how much it should be if the two numbers were just added up. And then the green effect right here is the bonus you get. That's actually the Emerson effect. So when you run them like I do with the red light during the daytime, as well as the 660 and 730, you get even more efficiency. So it's a little bit scientific and nerdy,
I
but I do believe it helps a lot.
Yeah, and I wish we just like pause, stop, people stop and look at this and read this because that's the number one thing that I correct with this. And I'm happy to do it because this is new stuff and it's fucking can be confusing as hell. But yeah, the Emerson effect is often confused with running far red after the light cycle. And that's not what the Emerson effect is. That's not the studied white paper backed effect, Emerson effect. Emerson effect is what Jack just went over right now. Is that's running the far red with the 660 nanometer during the regular light cycle. And it gives you a more efficient photosynthesis within the plant.
And you can see here, my cob LEDs are these white beams in the center. I've dimmed it down. So in the middle, you can barely kind of see with the naked eye, but these are the 730 nanometers from Rapid LED. They made a little far red LED puck. And so that's just a little 730
Yep.
right in between the blues. And it's funny because this is in the center of the tent. And I will say with the blue right above it, not only does the blue increase potential cannabinoids and terpene production, but it also increases anthocyanin production. So often I'll find the plant right in the dead center of the tent gets a little bit more purple or purple earlier before the rest of the tent does. So even just that tiny little, it bounces around the rest of the tent and it gets on all the plants eventually, but the more directness of it does make a difference. So
Yeah, it's the RGB. It's like those percentages that drive these different actions in the plant. So that's cool to see. Like right there, we saw it right before our eyes. You can kind of see it with where the lights are situated, where you would have different mixes of those. You'd have different actual colors hitting in those different spots. And that would be really cool and interesting just to see the plant differences. I bet you that's like you said, you get to see those different responses with the coloring with the anthocyanin production. It would be cool to, I mean, if it wasn't expensive, it would be cool just to get like a test across left to right of, cannabinoids and terpenes and see, oh, wow, if I do this, I get higher terpenes. If I do this, I get higher cannabinoids. That would be awesome.
they're doing kind of stuff like that, I think, at the Controlled Experiment Lighting Lab or whatever cell in Michigan. I think it's the Spartans over there, the Michigan State, I think.
Oh, love those guys.
Doing good work.
Shout out to the
But
Spartans.
super interesting stuff. We did talk a lot about lighting, light cycle and spectrum, et cetera, and even the different technologies like HPS, HID versus LED, et cetera. So I think we can move on from that and get into what I talked a little bit about with Brandon before we let him get running, which is the nutrient slash soil mix or any specific products that you like to use to keep your veg cranking. I'll pass it to you first, Spartan, on that one.
That's crazy because I just switched soil mixes because guess what? All of my damn grow stores are closed in my fucking town now, man. Like there's three around me and they're all fucking closed. Thanks, GrowGen. I really appreciate you. Shout out to GrowGen going through shutting down grow stores. Anyhow, you won't find me at a GrowGen, but I was happy enough to buy a bag of soil from my buddy Chris, who runs Country Roots out of the west side of the state of Michigan. I was at the event and he had a booth. So I was like, whoo, sweet. I'm already here and I can go shopping. Hell yeah. So yeah, I picked up a bag of living soil from Chris, and I've heard good stuff from him, and I've used his other things like worm castings and other amendments that he sells. He sells like a dry mix amendment for the like a bloom blend that I still am using to this day. So I picked up his soil mix. So I'm going to give that a try. So that's going to be my next one to use. I don't use a lot of soil. It's basically just when I filling up a Dixie cup with it for a clone. That's the soil I use. So it takes me a while to go through a bag because I'm reusing my soil and I just re-amend. Uh, so yeah, that's it. So, but I just want to get a good bag soil of some organic peat based is usually the way I go. Just because I don't know, I haven't found a good alternative yet. Other than because the good peat base has always worked well for me. I know that peat when it ages, it goes acidic, and the best thing to counteract acidic is calcium. And I love my plants love calcium, so I can just that works so good for me. So I'm like, I can just keep reusing my soil. I can throw a bunch of fucking calcium on it. It seems to be fucking balanced in the soil, and the microbes do the rest, and everything's happy. So I'm not too picky. I just want a good organic soil, and I was back in a small business, so an extra, plus in my book, and that's what I'm going with.
He's a great dude. I've seen him on fucking Talking Shit with Eagle, and lots of people have said great things about his products, soil, worm casting, etc. And it sucks. I think Sun Systems or Sunlight Supply, whatever, bought out a bunch of the grow stores here, and then they got shut down within like a year or less after that.
Yeah.
So the one I used to go to is no longer in existence, and then the next closest one I think is like a half hour away. So
Yeah,
unfortunate,
they just
but
buy up all the grow stores, shut down half of them, and then everybody has to go to the certain few, and they only have to run a few stores.
And then the customer service goes to shit. I mean, they're massive stores, and you walk around, and it's like there's like 5 staff, and no one even walks up or talks to you. It's just like
Yeah.
it is
I
kind
was
of funny.
running
There's a
M3
meme.
before. They're saying that in chat, and that picked up my eye. That's what I was
I love
running.
M3.
M3. If I
I'm
saw, if
still
I
two
found
years
M3
recycled
somewhere else,
or
I'd
three
probably
years.
grab it. But
I
yeah, I
think you can still
definitely.
buy it online. You can they'll
Yeah,
like ship it
yeah,
to you.
for sure. And I've
I
I
think
bought
Swan is
that
no
at
longer with
events
us.
too. I bought that from from the family, the Swanson family, at events as well. So that's one of my favorite. If you can buy it from the farmer, you can buy it from the damn people that produce it. That's the best, right? If you can do that. So check out your local Spring Up Cannabis event, man. You could probably don't. I mean, it's always cool to go there to go shopping for other things, but it's also cool to keep an eye out for something like that you might not be thinking of. It's not the greatest to have to lug a bag of soil around, but go throw it back in your car and come back. They usually give you bracelets or something.
Well, yeah, and there's a lot of different like local ones. I think there's like a Black Swan or something here in San Diego that's like a cannabis-based organic soil. I think there's like a Kutin, I don't, I'll mispronounce it, but there's a cool Canadian one that is out there. There's like the Coast of Maine mix if you're up there in that area. So there's lots of mixes regionally that do pretty decent out of the box, and then you can amend them lightly. The M3, if you use a proper pot size and good watering technique, is actually like a true water only all the way through. But it can be benefit by using like they have like Papa is perfect. I think it's like a worm casting or other maybe micro amendment blend.
Papa's perfect poo. I think it was some kind of bat bat guano base, if I remember right.
I think you're right.
Uh,
They use vermiculite, I think, in some of their soil. I love that mix, man. The M3 produced great results for me, and I mean, it's
Most,
still
I bet you at least 50% of my sub containers going right now are probably originally M3
that's what
at
I'm still
least.
rocking with, and I'm
Yeah.
just at the point now where I'm like, it's been so long, and I've recommended it so many times that I'm almost like I kind of just want to pull it out and start fresh with something, maybe that or maybe something different. But
That's what I
it's
was thinking of doing
been
for Chris's.
years.
It's like I might reset one and just put his whole bag on one and just rock it and
Yeah,
see
see how it
what
does.
it's on. Yeah.
That's a good plan, and I think it's worth looking into. And local stuff is always better. I think if you don't have to pay to get it shipped from across the country, you can pick it up locally at a. It doesn't even need to be a can of grow store, like we talked about. Doing like a local box store or local garden center. It could be mom and pop or just whatever is available to you. Cheap home grow doesn't necessarily have to be the fanciest, most exciting thing. It can still really get a decent job done. I think we talked a good amount. It's funny, we usually would have Dr. MJ. We haven't had him for a while, but we're all organic on this panel at this point. So there's not as much of a back and forth on, whose side is better
Well,
or worse or whatever.
I will say I'll throw in for the cocoa guys, and I'll say for at the Trichome Forge we use biochar or not biochar, what charcoal is what it's called. I always call it biochar. Charcoal is and it's a cocoa that we have access to, and it works really well.
I think some of my best grows were in cocoa. So, I mean, I definitely am not against it. I just like the ease of use and reusability with the organic style that I've set up, similar to Spartans with SIPs and peat-based soils and things like that, re-amending them over and over. Tao, do you have any thoughts on soils? Do you have any different mixes or nutrients or things that you
Yeah,
like
I
to
would
highlight during
say
veg?
if you want to grow any kind of plant, start with an earthworm bin, because that, dude, I'm telling you, that has been the most amazing shit I've seen. And then if I was, yeah, go with a subcool type recipe and see what happens. Brand Ruskin even has on his YouTube channel a video where he does the recipe. It's not what he does, is his exact recipe now, but he's like, yeah, you can still go to that one and it'll be sufficient to carry a plant into flower and finish.
I know people that
So
have grown in that mix and it works great.
yeah. So there's a lot of different mixes, and then yeah, so just take a mix and mix it up and go for it. Subcool soup soil. That's how I really started with quote organics, and that was way easier for me. Once you got that right, you just had to make sure that you had the plants happy when you put them into it and put them into flower, and usually they kicked ass, man.
It still
So
grows dank to this day.
and they would like die out pretty good at the end, so they weren't like stupid flush with nutrients. They flushed themselves.
Yeah, he said I'm
So
flushing the
yeah,
whole time. He'd just give
yeah,
water
yeah.
only, and you size the pot right, and he'd kind of go like lasagna technique with like a
Uh-huh.
more potting soil up top, and then the hotter stuff down below.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
I think
And it
that
worked well.
that method really it's
Yeah.
tried and true, man. It still works to this day.
Hmm. So yeah, but earth, and then when you use your own earthworm castings, that's even better. And like who I was talking about, oh, Russ Brandon was talking about front loading with calcium and nitrogen. That's pretty much earthworm castings eventually come down to that, especially if you use lime to keep them in the right pH, you know. So yeah, it's all good. Earthworm casting is great.
I like the Clackamas Coots mix, which is based on the Cornell mix, which can basically grow like almost all plants, but it's one
Yeah.
third compost, which he uses verma compost or worm castings, one third aeration, and one third Canadian sphagnum peat moss. And that mix, we work with hundreds, if not thousands, of growers over the years, and that's one of the mixes that's like the cheap home growiest of them all. Like if you could just get yourself peat, some compost, you can make your own worm compost, or you can get it locally a lot of places affordably. Um,
You talk to Jim, Collectivist Coot, man. He's got the best way to fucking make worm castings too. You get a giant fucking fabric pot. You throw your worms. Yeah, I mean, you throw like a bunch of compost in there, and then you throw your worms in, and you walk away and come back a couple years later, and it's like the best stuff ever. And
it's literally black
you got
gold
worm castings for your lifetime, basically.
and worms. People sell worms. Like that's a job. Like it's a full-on business. People have made lots of companies out there. Like there's only I can only think of a handful of them, right? Because like I only recommend the good ones. And there's like one in Colorado, there's one here in Sonoma, California that do really good jobs for like large scale commercial vermicompost. But that's two I can think of in the US. And I think there's another one, I think it's called Wormies, Wormies GR or something in Michigan. They do a good job. Um,
Maybe Grand Rapids.
yeah, there we go. Shout out to me. Look at me knowing Michigan
Hell
references and
yeah, man.
that's a
Shout out to
smiley
Wormies.
smiley reference, and he grows the dank. So if he's using it, I know it's putting out good stuff, and I like to give people some of those reference points. But that's three that I can think of, and I'm sure there's probably a dozen more. And feel drop them in the comments. People let people know what's your local worm casting or what's the best worm casting that you use because I just think there's not enough of them out there. Based on the fact that that's like the best input in gardening, in my opinion. Like if I could pick one thing, like what is the best, most important game changer? It's like one for the flavor of the cannabis, but two for like disease resistance. And it's just
Free
like
for the all-around use. Like you can use it in flour, you can use it in veg, you can use it in a fucking foliar. There's like, yeah, I don't know how you can beat it when you look at just the versatility and then the benefits that it brings.
just have good aeration. The only thing is it can get a little bit mucky if it isn't mixed well with like I like to do 33% pumice and then 7% rice hulls. The rice hulls break down and eventually give you some silica, but they also provide aeration throughout the entire time. And I also cap the top of my soil with rice hulls as like a mulch. But by doing that, it prevents the one issue that I've seen, which is people will get what are those little flies? Fungus gnats from having really damp soils if they have a high percentage of vermicompost because a third is easy to say, but when you actually get to like hand mixing it, you might have 50% vermicompost and 10% or 20% peat, and the mix might not be perfect. So trying your best to actually get it really well mixed. I see people rent or even buy used cement mixers. They'll throw like a little drum on it, and you can mix your own soil like that, or just shoveling it around on a tarp. But make
A
sure it's
quick,
mixed as even
quick
as you can.
a quick Google search too, you might find some kind of a farm nearby. If you can get one that's close nearby, then you get the huge benefits of all the microbes too, and which are local to you, right? Because it's local where you picked it up. If you buy something in a bag somewhere, that's shipped to you on Amazon, it's likely that it's not going to be, for one, if there is microbes in there, they're probably not local to you. So it might not be as big of an advantage. So what I'm saying is sometimes the $2 more worm casting per pound that you can get locally is worth that $2. Um, if you have that option, it's not for not everybody has that option because as powerful as this stuff is, not everybody's making it. That's for sure.
my local spot shut down during the pandemic and still I don't think has opened back up, sadly. So that's kind of a bummer because I do think that's a huge factor when it comes to quality inputs. Terra Vesco is the one that I would recommend. They're called Sonoma Valley Worm Farm, and I think they're part of the biggest little farm documentary. But they do the flow through worm things and they test their product every month or
Those are
two.
cool. Oh, those
And
flow through worm reactors are awesome.
it's amazing the scale of their operation, but like they test it every month or 2 months. I can't remember the exact timeline, and it's within like 1% of the nutritional content of like last year's. It's just so consistent what they're giving to it to make it, and I really do appreciate it. And that like it's almost more of a commodity coming from them because you know exactly what you're going to get. Because when I say worm castings, your local place might not be as good as my local place, or it might be better than my local place. Like some places I've seen have like spiders and all sorts of webbing as soon as they open that thing up, and it's like a mess in there. And in other places, it's immaculate. So it really depends on where you're at and how it's being managed. So I think moving from nutrient slash soil mix for veg, maybe wrapping up, we've got 5 minutes left with Spartan. Maybe some things to avoid or lessons that we've learned throughout our veggies that didn't go according to plan.
Oh, I think I think for me, I guess I can just look back in my experience. For me, is veg was always the the um the forgotten one, I guess. Like it was always the thing that was the least important to me when really it should be way more important. Like, why is the veg getting the hand-me-downs from the flower room when it comes to equipment and things like that? And that tends to be what happens in my veg a lot. And so what I've been trying to do to improve my game is to do some upgrades in my veg room and take that a little bit more seriously. Um, Now that being said, when you make those upgrades, watch out. Now your plants are gonna grow lot more vigorously than you might expect, and then you're gonna be ahead of yourself. So don't over veg. It's really easy to do, and you can top too much. Like you can say, "Oh, it's too bad. It's not a big deal if I over veg. I'll just chop them down." Yeah, you could chop them down, but now all those one stalks or two stalks now coming up, and if you do that continually you're going to make kind of a bush and you're going to have so many heads that you've split up those final colas so much that you don't have any big colas at the end. You just got a bunch of button buds that you're growing out. So there's always too much. So don't always, I guess, who was it? I think Leighton Morrison is the first person I heard say this. So I'm going to give him credit, but shout out to Leighton Morrison. Um, don't be a moron. Don't think that if I throw more onto this, if I throw more light, if I throw more wind, you name it, whatever the thing it is in the environment or whatever, if I buy this new gadget that's going to solve all my problems. Um, just research your stuff, talk to other growers who are growing maybe in the same situation that you and step up your game that way because it's real easy to just throw another product at it. And a lot of times that's the problem. You've got too many things going on at once and they aren't designed to work all together. So, to bring it back all around, I would just say my biggest advice is treat your veg room like you would your flower room. Give it the best you can for it. And then if you run into problems, try to strip everything down to the bare bones and work your way up because then I'm going to change one thing at a time until we fix this problem. Don't go the other way and just start throwing more things into an already problematic situation.
It's a great point. I think a lot of people make the mistake. They like to think, I am smarter than this process. I'm better than this process. I can change two things at once and I'll know precisely what made the difference. When in reality, it might take, 3 months or 4 months of a grow to learn if that one thing made a difference or didn't, or if it was worth it or if it was not. But if you change two things, like your lighting and your media, or your lighting and your nutrients that you use, like you're not going to know was the benefit from the lighting, was the benefit from the media. It's really easy to be like, well, I want to upgrade everything. I just had a harvest. I got this money now. I saved this money now. I'm going to reinvest it into a new light. new soil, new everything. Or I just heard about Spartan's new soil mix or Brandon's new soil mix or Dr. MJ's got this, nutrient regime that he's on that I want to try. And if you're going to do that, I'm also a fan of the one plant at a time. Don't bet the whole farm on a new method. Try it on one plant first, and then if it works well and you like it, if you certain people tend to lean one way. I've moved towards organics over time, but I liked cocoa. It works great. I just the mixing of the nutrients and things like that was not necessarily for me. So that was what drove me away more so than anything else, I guess. But it worked great. It grew great weed. It's just a process that is more difficult for me to make happen consistently and feel good about. Where mixing up soils and stuff, I like getting my hands in the dirt. I like having a bag of dry amendments that I can just have sitting and not think like, is this gonna like expire or get like better or worse? And I've heard that the
I
nutrients
love that too.
stay shelf stable or whatever, but and some people say they even get better with age. I don't know. The ABs make me a little nervous. Like I've got some stuff left over from when I used to grow in cocoa. I'm like, would it still be good? Could I just pop it out and shake it up and grow with it? It should, right? Like chemically, I don't think it's gonna change much. I don't see any expiration dates on any of this stuff, but at the same time, um, a bag of bat guano is going to be a little bit more consistent, I think, over time. But who knows? Maybe there's microbials that can get in there and things like that. With that said, I've been rambling a little bit, and I just noticed it is 5:45, which is about the time I let Spartan Grown say his final thoughts and shout outs before he gets running on over to the Michigan Bros Grow Show.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Yeah, we are having a show tonight, so you can catch me over there in about 15 minutes. But yeah, otherwise, man, I just want people to keep growing at home. I love the commercial scene. I love seeing the stuff at commercial and what's going on, and I love access. I like the idea of that, even though I don't like the practice of some of the big grows and all of that. Not everything is good there, but in the end, it means it's more access to everyone. So I'm cool with that. And I'm cool with seeing all these people in chat all the time, and it makes me happy to see the same faces again and again. I just want to shout out to everybody there and much love. Of course, everybody on the panel, that's like family. Much love to you guys. Hey, I'm going to be out in Vegas for MJ BizCon. Hopefully, I run into some of you guys listening, or maybe people watching, or some of you guys on the panel. That'd be even cooler. But I just got the confirmation with my rooms and everything. So I'll be there in Vegas first week of December for MJ BizCon. We have a booth with Grandmaster LEDs come out and say hi.
Cheers, Spartan. Thank you so much for joining
So
us. Pleasure as
Peace out,
always.
Spartan. Have a good one, kid.
I don't think I said it. Keep growing, everybody.
Absolutely. And to what he was saying, it's crazy seeing a lot of the same faces, and some of you have been here for years. I'm seeing, abolished, and it's frugal forest growing. I'm calling you abolished, but that's what the other name was. We had J5 20 on not too long ago on the show, Stony Creek. Uh, Penny Peddler's Rippers always sending me good videos on the Instagram. Donkey Populous has been on the show, showing off some cool stuff as well. But yeah, we've so many great longtime listeners out there and people that show up. Caveman's been on many times as well. Okie Grower been on the show several times. So many people in the chat with us, Genetic Memory Farms, that have contributed not only to the chat but to the show by coming on, showing off their garden, talking about and sharing their grows and things like that. But getting back to the good old topics at hand, I actually, sometimes we do a specific grow episode like tonight where we I wrote up a little topic and I had sub sections and we worked through it, and look at us, we're almost 2 hours in and we've covered pretty much everything. And Brandon got to get his stuff out, lightning round at the end. We've got a few minutes left here with myself and Tao to go through the final kind of points that I wrote out. So continuing on, you talked about your nutrient and soil mix. Any things that in veg has gone wrong, whether it's your grow or somebody that you helped, things that you might want to avoid or lessons learned throughout the grow process.
Yeah. Pretty much something what Spartan said, definitely. Don't take for granted the veg and like be like, oh, if they're alive, I'll get them to health and then go from there because especially if you want to put them into flour because once they skip a beat, they skip and they'll never be the same. And just better to keep them vibrant from either clone to finish a flower or from start a seed to finish a flower. You definitely want them to have the best life possible. Um, And yeah, and then the other part is, even if you're just using them as mother plants or keep genetics, you want to keep them happy as hell too, because if you're going to take clones off of them, the easiest way to cloning success is to have a healthy plant to take it from. And yeah, so you need healthy mothers to take healthy clones from. So yeah, it's often that's when I was young, yeah, back in the day, and it still happens that you take veg for granted because flour, it will always be room most important, because if that gets fucked up, then you're losing your product, you're losing whatever, either your medicine or your money, whatever. So, but yeah, so that's one thing. And oh yeah, the other thing I've learned is don't get overzealous with starting a crazy amount. I mean, but you do want to start a little extra in case shit goes wrong. But yeah, especially if you're paying for those genetics, because then you get too many started, you won't have room, and then either you'll have them hurting because you don't have a good spot for all of them, or you have to kill some, or some will just get, taken out from nature or whatever.
They'll
All right,
suffer
so
from the overcrowding or,
yeah,
you know, end up not noticing a herm or a male.
or just not having room in the flower area, so you just keep a whole bunch of veg for too long, and then they get hurt that way. So, but yeah, so yeah.
Yeah, but I think
Those,
like being root bound, being kept in a pot for too long, kept in a tent for too long,
yeah,
overgrowing the
all
grow
that
space.
jazz, especially when it was the ones that you really wanted to check out. So you start up these a whole bunch of seeds and you want to check them out, and now, yeah, you can't even really judge them properly because they're all fucked up. And even if you get them right, you have to start clones and then do each clone all over. So yeah, that's it.
I think
Don't.
it's easy to make the mistake of like if I'm comfortable, then the plants are comfortable. But people forget that like they're putting on a jacket and they're putting on, sweatshirts and sweatpants, things like that that are keeping them warm when those days when it starts to have those temperatures drop and the plants don't have access to that, right? And so we got to make sure, I think often we underestimate the importance of environment as newer growers. And it's maybe just because it's difficult, you're kind of stuck with what your situation is. You've got to do what you got to do. If you're in a freezing cold environment, it can be tough to get it warm enough. And if you're in an extremely warm environment, it might be hard to keep it cool enough. I think that's more often the case for people, especially because grow lights do put out a decent amount of light, and it's easy to get too hot. So yeah, interesting that a lot of people think have to live through the issue for it to set in their mind, like getting the plants too hot and then seeing them suffer, and then realizing like, oh man, I let those plants get too hot. Now they're starting to taco up, or they're drooping, or they're literally melted to death because it was 110 degrees or whatever, and I didn't rectify the situation soon enough. So there's lots of things that I think we can learn firsthand. I try as much as I can to learn secondhand from growers that I'm helping out. If they had like spider mites, like my barber, for example, I went through Sentinel's YouTube channel, the spider mite pest primer, and then I found out what are the options for
Right.
sprays that I could spray to knock down the population, and then what can I follow that up with in terms of like predator mites that I can ensure my buddy won't have to lose his harvest. He was in flower when they ended up popping up, so he used, I've mentioned this in the past, but Lost Coast plant therapy. He would soak these little barbecue skewers and then removed all the webbing that he could. And then he just released like 4 or 5 times the recommended amount of, it was Californicus, I believe. And those ended up eating all of the spider mites. So there was nothing left. And he ended up getting to harvest. So I'd say 3 out of the 4 plants were still really fire. One of them kind of had a little bit of a funky taste, but that might have just been the strain. So at the end of the day, um, knowing your options is really pivotal. And I think a lot of people, like Brandon mentioned at the top, when you do have a problem in veg, um, don't just go to flour, like fix it. Some people
Mhm.
might just toss it because it's cheaper or easier to toss it
Right.
than to fix it. But sometimes it's worth fighting it because when you do fight it, one, you learn the costs, you understand if it's worth it or not. And then two, you can get the experience and knowledge on how to fight it if and when it comes up again. Because if you got spider mites this year, maybe they're around in your environment. So maybe that's something that might pop up next year in the summer or spring or whatever time of year you ended up getting it. And like if you're in Michigan, like Spartan, in the wintertime, you're probably not going to have as many issues with that kind of stuff. But during the summertime, it's much more of a prevalent
Yeah,
Like
transition time, like you were saying too. Be mindful of the transition times from different seasons. Because once there's nothing to eat outside, they smell plants. They'll come in from wherever and find yours.
it's
Um,
amazing. Tiny little crevice or
yeah,
crack they can get through.
I'm trying to think of anything else. Yeah, I don't know what else to say as far as
What's the worst pest or pathogen that you've had to face in veg or flower?
the worst. Well, I don't know. When I got the termites and those two plants outside, that was it. I just pulled them and they couldn't be salvaged. Um, but uh, I got white flies one time, and I didn't know what they were at the time. But those things leave a nasty uh, residue, which freaked me out. And the
They
witch
carry
stores, they
diseases.
were nasty. Yeah,
Yeah, whitefly is a nasty one. That's
I ended up getting these nematodes that actually worked. They disappeared. Yeah,
good old ninja toads, as some like to call them, but the nematodes are powerful. They can be really good in the soil level at taking out like the larvae or whatever and knocking down populations or preventing them from, because some of them have really short life cycles. Our plants are alive for sometimes months. And these life cycles of some of these things, if you can take out the larvae or whatever, they don't live super long. And if they're not reproducing or able to successfully reproduce, then just interrupting one link of the chain sometimes is enough to do it.
yeah, that happened so long ago. I don't even know who recommended getting a nematode. I think it was the guy at the hydro store. Even
I
with
was just about to say, I bet you it was a hydro
mulch.
store thing because that was something commonly carried for a long time.
Yeah, they've been around even in regular gardening. So that was probably where.
It's nice to see
Um,
that in regular gardening, like even predator mites have made more of like a expanse, like
oh
copert
yeah,
or
they sell
copper.
ladybugs everywhere at regular garden stores.
Yeah. But like even like Swarovski or Californicus and like
All
some of these other
right.
things are like getting larger and larger scale. Like some of these big companies have been around for a long time, but um, you know, other ones are up and coming and scaling, and some are more successful than others, and it can be a difficult thing. I think biotactics went through some issues with raising and rearing their own predator mites and things like that, and
Yeah,
difficulties. So
some sort of fee thing. I forget, but that was like a big lawsuit, right? I remember
yeah,
now. I'm
yeah.
hearing that story.
I don't know the exact specifics off the top of my
Neither
head,
do
but
I. Yeah, yeah.
it was unfortunate because I want as many of those companies in business as possible, so we have more options and lower prices and better availability, quicker
Right.
shipping and things like that. So if you're out there and you're into that kind of stuff, there's money to be made. People love that stuff and they need it. In some cases, even if they don't love it, it's that or their crop gets destroyed. And that can be a very strong financial motivator for a lot of cultivators out there, not just in cannabis, a lot of cross application for the stuff. Some of it is more cannabis specific, and cannabis is a huge growing industry, home growers to commercial settings. So there's a lot to think about on that front for the cheap home growers out there. If you have little side hobbies and interests like this, you might be able to get into that kind of stuff. But we're coming up to the 5:58 hour. I do apologize. I forgot to make an announcement earlier in the show or on the YouTube that we're an hour behind um, because we had the daylight savings time. So, to anybody out there who doesn't observe daylight savings time, I apologize for not letting you know that we
Uh,
started either an hour earlier or later or whatever, depending on where you're at.
is America
If you
the
do watch
only
live.
idiots that do this shit? That we are, aren't we?
I'm not sure. My wife's from Arizona and they don't do that shit there.
Yeah,
So at least
well,
one state figured it out.
yeah, in one state, okay, no, I think maybe more than one. Yeah, there's a proposition, I think, in a couple of states, like, let's stop this already.
I
What's
think
the,
there's a couple, but her whole life she grew up in Arizona, and so
it
like when
wasn't,
she
they
moved
didn't
to like
know. Right.
Florida or California, it's like always fucked with her
It's
probably
like,
more
what
than
is
most
this
people.
nonsense about?
Yeah, it seems kind of stupid if you think about it. Like if you
It
grew up your
just
whole life not having
disrupts
it.
people's sleep patterns. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I think it was really a farm thing. Like when I looked into it a while ago, I think it was like a old like it was to help the farmers have more daylight or whatever to help with their planting and harvesting cycle.
Doesn't create any more daylight than there is, Jack.
It's not
You
creating
understand this,
daylight.
right? No,
It's
it
just
doesn't. Right.
it's making it so that
It makes no difference
societally,
for the farmers. Trust me.
I think
I'm
it's so that they
telling
could
you.
wake up
No,
earlier or later, depending on the season, to plant more easily. I really do think it is stupid,
they
honestly.
wake up
But
by the sun. It doesn't matter. So
right. That rooster is going to cock a
Yeah,
doodle
there
doo
you
when the
go.
sun comes up.
Exactly, man.
And it's like your cats, like they'll be begging you for the treat an hour early or whatever. They don't give a shit about the daylight savings
Right,
time.
right, right. They
They're on
know
that biological
their
clock.
own
But
clocks.
where can the people find you, Tal?
Hopefully not in jail. But I am the American one on YouTube and the American one underscore with underscore Akeens on the IG. And yeah, I'm always around in chats. I've been lurking sometimes. And yeah, it's always good to be here. Good to see everyone. Chats, shout out to chat. I haven't been in there very much tonight. I apologize, but always good being here.
It's tough when there's only like three or four of us. Sometimes we get like seven, eight, or nine people on the panel, and when you're not having to talk as much, you can engage in the chat a little bit more. So I understand.
Exactly.
So there's just three or four of us tonight. So definitely harder to engage with the chat. I did get to answer a few questions I saw pop up here and there, just via text. I didn't necessarily include all of them in the show. We did have one make its way to the show that I think Spartan copied over, or a couple. I think I had another one from Okie Grow I copied. But if you want to find me, I'm at Jack Greenstock on Instagram. Jack underscore Greenstock is my backup account on Instagram in case they delete me, which they often do to cannabis accounts. But if you want to go to a profile where they don't delete cannabis accounts, X. Jack underscore Greenstock. It was formerly known as Twitter. You can find me there. 50strains.com is my website. You can find all my products there. Still on sale and stuff. So check them out if you're interested. Got books and seeds. And all that said, I can't even say keep growing because I'm not growing yet. Get growing if you're not. Like if you're like me, get back growing, start growing again. Make growing great again. How about that? Shout out to all the growers out there. And if even if you're not growing, keep growing again. It's awesome. It's worth it. And I'll join you on that mission. Cheers, everybody. Peace and love, y'all. And grow with love.